Hello, good morning, and a warm welcome to today's online NAHT course, Game, Set and Match, a winning strategy for looking after you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And just a brief word from me about housekeeping before we begin. We will, of course, be sharing course materials with you as soon as we're able to. And please note, as you've just heard, that this course is being recorded. If you would like captions, you can request these in your control panel now. Please do post comments in the chat, and we will be having a poll at the end of our session today, so that will come up on your screens. And now, without further ado, it's with great pleasure and a real privilege that this morning I welcome David, who has been researching and publishing about resilience for the 4 years since he left headship. He's written one of our Discovery Education Pathway courses and has published books for teachers, Lift, Risk and Spin, on resilience and decision making. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to welcome David this morning and hand over to you now, David. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and hello colleagues, and great that you've taken the time to come and consider your own resilience. That's a really good thing to do, and as Fiona has talked about, that's something that I have prioritised in my career, is to go out there and encourage others to look after themselves more than they possibly do. As Fiona said, I've done a lot of research around this area, and I believe that the emotional and relational elements of teaching are not being covered as widely as they should or need to be. And as a result of that, I think that we're in the dilemma that we're in, where far too many of us are not in a sustainable practice of looking after ourselves, and therefore aren't the best head teacher or leader that they can be as a result of not looking after themselves. And my technique is very much around trying to take some ideas that are everyday things and translate that and morph that into some learning about mental health and resilience. And that's what I intend to do with you this morning. So as you can see on the screen, I'm trying to take a Wimbledon theme, because Wimbledon is about to come up, and therefore I thought that it was a good thing to try and link that through. And the image that you can see there is an image of the longest tennis match ever at Wimbledon. And as you can see on that right-hand column, the final game ended up being 70-68 in the 5th set, which is quite extraordinary. And at this point in the turn, you may be feeling like these two who were photographed at the end of that extended match. Because actually, during the course of this academic year, it must feel like you've done sets of time, and it must feel like that you may well be as exhausted as they are. And that exhaustion is a real thing, and that exhaustion is understandable. But this is not a criticism of any one person or anybody that they're not looking after themselves. Quite the reverse. What I'm actually asking to do is for you to reconsider the future, and that you put into your daily diet elements of looking after yourself. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore that this morning through the feature of Wimbledon and Wimbledon tennis. So I've just blown up the picture there of the loser in this enormous match. So this is poor old Mahut, who only managed to 68 games in the set, and he's looking slightly grumpy. And I think we've all felt that grumpiness at times during the course of the academic year, and that's understandable. Resilience isn't about Teflon and not having lows. Resilience for me is the understanding that you're inevitably going to have lows, that you are able to find yourself out of those lows as quickly as possible. So that's what I think that we need to be thinking around, is proactive strategies to look after ourselves. So if we do need to bounce back, which is the phrase that regularly comes up when we're talking about resilience, We don't need to bounce back from very far. When we're tired, like Mahout, it takes us longer. When we're tired, like Mahout, we don't see things straight. We start to make things bigger than they actually are. And this can be debilitating in our ability to think rationally, sensibly, and as a human being would want to reflect on what's happening to us. So sometimes when we don't look after ourselves, we end up in a situation where we make it worse by not seeing what's in front of us accurately. And I know when I was a head teacher, I was guilty of this. So it's not as if I didn't fall into the same traps as you possibly have. It's more a case that in hindsight, I can now see that so much more clearly. And that's why I wanted to share with you today how those two things can be linked. Part of resilience is learning new things. And that's why I started with this match. It's actually the longest match ever and will always be the longest match ever, which I think is quite an interesting idea because there's been a change of rules since that happened. It took place over 3 days and the two players from America and France, it took place over 3 days. So they did actually have the opportunity to sleep and recalibrate and recharge. And I think that's an important element for us to think about, not in great detail today because we don't have time, but the importance of sleep, the importance of protecting sleep, and the importance of making sure that sleep is really well considered and thought through, in order to make sure that when we're interpreting our experiences during our day, that we can see those experiences for what they are. There's actually a plaque to commemorate this epic match. It's on court 18, so on one of the outside courts, not one of the show courts, which we're going to come on today. And as I said before, it's never going to be broken because the final set rules have been changed to equip it. But let's try and match that to our understanding. Let's try and match that to our perception of our situation now. Just take a moment in terms of how tired you are now to how tired you were at the beginning of the school year or the beginning of your week. And as we approach Friday and we approach the weekend, yes, we can look forward to the weekend. We also need to recognise that we've allowed ourselves to get to this level of tiredness through the course of this week. We've allowed ourselves to get to the point where our resilience is struggling because we've taken our eye off the ball. We've stopped to looking after ourselves. And as a result of that, we're not seeing things as clearly as we were on Monday. And maybe that's a consideration about kind of managing yourself during the course of the week or managing yourself over the course of the academic year so that you get more, there's a steadiness around your elements of resilience. There's a steadiness around how you perceive yourself being during the course of the term, the course of the academic year, the course of the day. And for me, it's very much around checking in with yourself. It's very much finding moments in the day. How am I going? What do I need? Am I working too hard? Do I need food? Do I need drink? Do I need to link with somebody? Do I need a boost? Do I need a little bit of a lift? And when we can identify those features nice and quickly, that increases our productivity, that increases our effectiveness, and it increases our ability to manage our daily duties. Because for most of us, especially those of you in leadership roles, which I assume are the majority, the demands on you are great. And if the demands on you are so great, what one needs to do is make sure that we look after ourselves in order to meet those demands, in order to be able to face up to these demands, in order to recognize yourself within the decisions that inevitably you're going to have to make. So there's my opening gambit, just to get us thinking and just to get us switched off from the job, the work that we're doing, and start to consider ourselves. So well done for getting to that point. So let's take it further forwards then, folks. Let's learn something potentially new. Now, I've discovered over the course of doing these webinars that one of the best ways that to engage folk is to do a little quiz. And there's something about competition and human nature that makes us come out in our competitive selves. And no matter what you do, no matter what quiz it is, there's always somebody who wants to be the fastest finger first on the chat box. And that's exactly what I'm looking for today, folks. So please do feel free to dive in and use the chat box feature to try and identify some of the winners of Wimbledon in the past. So what I've done is I've had a look through. Some I've gone back a little bit further than others, but mostly recent tennis folk, shall we say. And the reason I'm doing this will become clear over time, but I think it's just at the moment, just trying to focus you in and switch you off from your current work situation. So let's see if we can identify some of these folk. So fastest fingers first. So get ready in your typing fingers and see if we can get some answers nice and quickly. The good news is, folks, that I'm conscious of the fact it's Friday, and I'm conscious of the fact that that means you might need a few extra hints. So what you're going to see is a series of 10 pictures, and in the corner are the initials of those players. So that gives you at least 2 of the letters that I'm looking for. And if you want to be faster, I guess you can just go for surname and we'll accept that as well. So here's the first one, folks. This lady won the Wimbledon Championship, and her initials are PK. Let's see if somebody is fast enough to write that into the chat box. Whether you're all going to be cautiously waiting to see if I name and shame you at the time when you type your answers in. Okay, so maybe we don't know the answer. Maybe I need to go through them all rather than just going for the first one. Let's show the second one then, and let's see where we get to with number 2. So the second one has the initials AB, and she was, or she is, an Australian female tennis player who won recently at Wimbledon, and was, I believe, until recently, not the world #1 in the women's game, if that helps. Well done. We've got our first answer. Well done, first answerer. I'm not going to name you, but you can see yourself up there on the chat box, but well done. It is a lady called Ash Barty, who is an Australian. Brilliant, well done. Well done, we've got our first one under our belt. Maybe I started with one that was too difficult, or some of you felt you couldn't spell the first name because it was tricky, but we'll come to the answers at the end. But well done for that first, I would argue, correct answer. Okay, the next lady here, as you can see, because she has the Rose Bowl in her arms, was successful at Wimbledon and has won this competition, I think only once. But she has most certainly got it. Okay, we've got a first name, which is marvelous. So we're getting close. We've got a first name, and there's I can't remember the second name, but I've got a first name. That's good. So we're getting close. Maybe half a point for the first name, should we say? Let's say that. Okay, just before we all get dispirited because we don't know of any, I'm going to go for an easier one to balance it off a little bit. I think this lady is very recognisable. Thank you. We've already got the answer, and that demonstrates, doesn't it, that we've already got the answer. It's interesting, isn't it? Some of them are recognisable, and some of them not so much, and we have to wonder why that is. But well done. The Serena Williams effect, and both her and her sister were significant, weren't they? And I found out the other day that Venus and the success of Venus Williams is the reason why men and women get equal prize money at Wimbledon, as a result of her success and her ability to take on the authorities to get equality in prize money, which I found out as a result of doing this presentation for you today. Number 5, folks. We're back to the trickier ones, so we might go a little bit quiet on the chat box again for this one. But there's an A and a K in this lady's repertoire. Not one of the more known tennis players, I would argue, but nonetheless a winner and a holder of that Rose Bowl. Oh, very good. We have an A and we have a K and we have words going in within it. Maybe we were building confidence after that first one. Well done, folks. Okay. Now, interestingly, when I did this quiz with my wife, she struggled with the first 5, but she got all 5 of the next 5. And I wonder whether that's a hidden message as well. Good luck with trying to write this into the chat box. Tricky. I think that would be cool. We've had some previous correct answerers. Maybe they know this one. Oh, very good, very good. That's a very good effort of the spelling of the word. Well done, colleague. So he famously was a qualifier in the year that he went right through the qualifying stages. Qualified, he knocked out Henman, much to the disappointment of 95% of the crowd, and then went on to win, which is one of the very few times that an unseeded player has gone right through to the final, which makes it significant. Oh, the colleague says that it's in your time. Okay, that places you somewhere on a timeline, madam. Thank you. Okay, a recognisable face, possibly for the wrong reasons, because he's recently been in the press and coming to fame at such an early stage has obviously done some significant psychological damage to the poor man, who's struggled with the success and the notoriety that he's had as a result of being a very rich young man. This one, I've deliberately not shown his face, particularly because you don't need it. What you will need is some help and supporters to try and spell his surname, I would have thought. But I'm willing to take any guesses. Oh, this is, see, I told you. We started off gently and now we're quite happily typing them in, aren't we? Please don't apologise for the spelling of that surname. It really is fine. It really is fine. It's understandable. Even by the top of his head, we recognise him because he's a hugely successful player, isn't he? And we're going back a little bit further now, which may be a test of age of participants more than anything else. But who do we think there? Oh, straight out, very good. Now he was a highly successful tennis player, and was winning almost boringly every year, and we never thought anybody would surpass him. And yet up comes the next. No, he does look very young there. Yeah. I'm not sure what year it is, but yes, he does. And then the final one, folks, and then we'll end our dialogue there. It's a tricky one. Yes, you're right, actually. Thank you, colleague. Yes, the Aussie one. Yes, if you heard him speak, he would be Australian. And well done, we've managed to get there. So we got to Lleyton Hewitt. So I'm happy for you to self-mark. I'm happy for you to believe you in whatever score you're willing to give yourself. So Petra Kvitova, tricky spelling, especially for number 1. Ash Barty, Simone Halep, Serena Williams, as many of you got, Angelique Kerber, Goran Ivanovic, Boris Becker, Novak Djokovic, Pete Sampras, and Lleyton Hewitt. Go on, be brave, folks. Type in your number, type in where you got to with that. The prize is the excitement of knowing that you've done a good score. We've got some good scores. Well done, folks. I think that's really good. And thank you for sharing them. So why have I shown you all these characters? Well, these characters might be seen as role models, might be seen as reached the pinnacle of their achievement. And when they're holding that cup, when they're holding that plate, when they're holding that bowl, as they've described it, you might think, well, yeah, they've reached their peak. How easy was that? But actually what we don't see there is all the hard work that went into success. And I think it's important for us to recognize that even though these are highly successful individuals, it's come through hard work, it's come through the ability to bounce back, it's come through the ability to look after themselves in order to support them to overcome the inevitable negatives, the inevitable things that aren't going to go right. So although we see them in this photograph as the pinnacle of their achievement, I think it's good to recognise that that actually they've been on a journey. They're not immune to this resilience stuff. I get quite frustrated when we think about resilience as being them and us, or mental health is other people, or mental health is not mine. But it certainly is everybody's, because we all have a brain and we all have the perceptions and interpretations of what's there. And one colleague here is saying that the male players seem to have left a bigger impact on our memories. And maybe there's something around the greater impact, because greater publicising of those figures, more prominent in the press, more prominent in the TV schedules. Who knows? But there certainly seems to be a disparity. Maybe Venus Williams is doing something around that to get a little bit more equality. It'll be interesting to see how these championships play out in that regard. Well done, folks. We've had a nice little quiz there, and well done for those scores. Impressive that you know at least one gender's worth of of answers. Okay, so what are we looking at here? Well, thanks to David Goddard, we're looking at a very impressive world-class sporting arena. Now, before you think about it, it's not. This is not centre court. This is court 1, and I just love seeing things from a new angle. I think a new perspective on ourselves, a new perspective on our interpretations of our world is important. And here's a new interpretation. We don't see court number 1 in this way. It was quite something when it was built. It was 12,000 capacity. It opened in 1997, and it had its retractable roof, which still to this day amazes me, although many stadiums across the world have copied that idea, because it's a good idea when we're having tournaments in the UK. So here I've got some more questions. These questions are very different from the previous questions that I've asked. The first one here is who should be number 1? And by that I mean, not in terms of courts, in terms of who, a person. We work in a very compassionate professional environment, but as compassionate people, we tend to look to others, don't we, to look after them. And therefore, some of you may well be automatically going, well, it can't be me, it must be someone else. And if that is you, then you're not alone. This is a very common answer that we get. I'm there to support others. I'm here to help my colleagues. I'm here to lead a team. I'm here to help my students. I'm here to guide the vision. Whatever the answer is, there seems to be a distraction between you and and who is number one. I hope that your answer is yourself, but I doubt whether your answer is. Did anybody automatically, when that question came up, think of themselves? I'm not going to pick on you. I'm just interested in your response. Marvelous. So we've got a yes straight out, which is fantastic. And it will be really interesting. It's quite a rare answer, but it's a good answer. And maybe it's an opportunity for us to think, actually, why? Why are we number one? One common saying that comes up is, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you don't give to yourself, you've got nothing left to give. And maybe this colleague here who is saying that, yes, they did see themselves as number one, was able to do that, was able to rationalize that, was able to reason that out with themselves and come to that first point. Oh, thank you. Come back and saying, interesting, putting everyone else first leads to our own burnout. How perceptive. Thank you. That's a really interesting way of putting it. I regularly ask people whether their current practices are sustainable. And I regularly get the answer of no. So I regularly then ask the supplementary question of, if it's not sustainable, what's going to happen? I don't know. I don't really think about it. But here the colleague is saying it's going to lead to burnout, and I think you're right. We have got to, at some point, put ourselves first. And what we've got to do in order to achieve that goal is we've got to somehow justify that to ourselves so that we don't feel guilty when we do it. We find a reason and we find a solution because we're able to reason out why we're doing it. Thank you. This is great. The chat box is flowing along nicely now. Brilliant. I must say, I never thought of myself as number one. I may have been at a disadvantage as a result. Interesting. I think you wouldn't be alone, colleague, if you didn't think of yourself as number one. I think it's a regular answer. I think it's about not seeing the word self as a prefix to the word compassion. That we see self-compassion as something that we don't have time for, something that we're too busy to do, something that we'll do it once we've got other people done. But if you rationalize it out to yourself in that way, we end up with what colleague said is about burnout, or we end up walking away from education, away from teaching, or in this case, potentially a retirement. I always put myself last, but realised too late that was the wrong thing to do. Don't be too critical of yourself there, colleague. It's a very regular thing. I think it's very easy, and certainly during COVID particularly, was this requirement to be at the beck and call of others. We wanted to help, we wanted to be there, and as a result of wanting to help and wanting to be there, we ended up being open all hours, a smorgasbord of attention, answerable at any point, any time, for anyone. But actually, what that failed to recognise was that we needed some time to reorganise our thinking. We needed time to eat and to sleep and to recharge. And so folks that are saying that it's you put yourself last, you're not alone, which is why we keep doing these webinars, to just remind people that if you put yourself as last, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing yourself no favours in that regard. So this second question arguably is so similar to the first that you might think it's the same. But who actually is number one? Now that we're stopping to think about it, now you've bought yourself this time to consider it in more detail. Now we have some learned colleagues on the line who are willing to put things into the chat box. Who is actually number one? You think back to situations that you found yourselves in, could the situation have been any different had you looked after yourself? Had you managed your well-being? And as a result of that, how would the situation have panned out differently? Would the situation have resolved quicker? Would the relationships in which you found yourself have changed, been less fractious, maybe solution finding rather than problem magnifying? I think this is an important question to really dive into, which is why I'm taking the time now to really dive into it. And I thank you for the people that are responding. So no regret, and I think it's a good thing to not have regret. I see this as forward thinking and forward developing. I'm not in to create anybody having a guilt trip. I think for me, what's important is actions are taken from this point on with a new awareness of its importance, rather than retrospectively chastising ourselves for things that we haven't done in the past or we failed to recognise in the moment, but more a promise to ourselves that we're going to look after ourselves more in the future. That's where I think we need to get to. Perhaps my well-being and my exposure to other experiences for myself was disadvantaged. Everything I did was largely for the school, and schools are big communities with too many people's hands to hold. Who holds my hand? Lovely. I think that the idea of hand holding is a beautiful one. And we want to hand hold other people. We need to hand hold other people. But also other people need to be able to be looking after themselves, need to be empowered to look after themselves. And if we do it for them, or if we're always there for them, how are they going to look after themselves? Because we're not equipping them with the tools to be able to do that. So one way potentially to rationalize it with yourselves, folks, is if we do it for them, if they're reliant upon us, is that sustainable? And if we're not there, how are they going to cope without us? So maybe seeing it as about empowering others rather than supporting others or being there for others. Maybe by always being the stabilizers, the children or the people that we're working with are never going to learn to cycle without them until we take them off. If we always provide the safety net under which people travel or traverse across a tightrope, are they ever going to get the confidence and capacity to do it without? If we always hold other people's hands, are they ever going to learn how to walk alone? How are they ever going to cope without you? You're just in building into that relationship a need for you to be there. That's difficult. And here we've got another colleague talking about it's very lonely at the top, and I agree. That's why I talked at the top of the presentation about the idea of the relational aspect of teaching. And sometimes the relational aspect of headship is very isolating, because you're playing a dual role. You're playing judge and jury. You can't be social and also holder to a counter. But you need to find others ways of mitigating that so that you still get the person that you need. Now, if you look up a previous webinar, we talked about who needs to be in your crew. And we did a previous webinar that I'm sure the admin team will be able to access or give you access to, around who is in your crew. And there are 4 groups of people that we need in our crew that we haven't got time to go into now. But in summary, we need to surround ourselves with others. Resilience is not a single soul-minded activity. We have to have others around us to help and support us as we move forwards. So if you do feel isolated, the first action is to reduce that sense of isolation and go out and find somebody else to help to shape that perception of the situation that you find yourself in, which is not as difficult as you think. And if you know who you're looking for and you know where to find these folk, then it's an efficient exercise to get you back on to where you need to be. So here's some more questions. Now we've got to the deeper reflections. And even if you don't interact with the chat box, I hope that you're starting to really think about your situation, your context, your world, because this is about you, not about me. I live in my world, but that's not helpful to you in your world. My interpretation of my world is mine, which I'm sharing with you and happy to share with you, but you need to look at it in terms of your world. So who has managed to find a way of prioritizing themselves? How were you able to justify it to yourself and allow yourself to prioritize you? Now, just while we're waiting for anybody who might want to put something in the chat box, and again, it's a self-reflection, so please don't feel any pressure to do that, but let me just expose how I justify it to myself. I see the end point. But I think about, if I say to myself, I haven't got time to go for a walk, I rationalize that by saying, okay, how am I going to feel at the end of my walk? I'm going to feel refreshed, invigorated, more awake, more lively, feeling good about myself. I've been out, exercised. There will be a clarity and a freshness in my perception of the situation that I find myself in. Therefore, if I know that, why wouldn't I go for a walk? And that the hour that was spent going for the walk is an hour well spent if we move ourselves away from thinking that we need to be busy all of the time to get through the tasks that we need to do, and change that perception from busyness to productive. And that sometimes looking after ourselves makes us more productive. And if we make ourselves productive, the time spent on getting ourselves ready to do the task is time well spent and not wasted time. So that's just one way that I go about trying to justify it to myself, because believe you me, folks, I've got mental health problems, and believe you me, I have to manage my brain just as much as any other imperfect, vulnerable human being. I guess the more challenging question for all of us to consider is, how long do you need for prioritising you? How long is it? Well, it depends on how far you're bouncing back. If you're bouncing back from a significant way, it's going to take a significant time to bounce yourself back from. But if you're checking in with yourself regularly, and therefore you're not dropping as far before you manage that, then the bounce back ability element of it is not so great. If it's a short bounce back, it's going to take a short time to get back to where you want to get to. And that's a good place to be. When can you find the time to do this in the school day? Well, that's up to you. You've got to find the time. You've got to justify the time. You've got to publicise the time. So as a head teacher, I used to have time when my door was closed. And that was a known thing. And I said, I can't be all attention to all of you all of the time, all day, every day. So there's going to be 15 minutes where I just need to recharge, ready to be more effective as a result of recharging myself. And I think just acknowledging my humanness, just acknowledging my imperfections, helped others to identify theirs too. And as a result of that, it was a much healthier time. In terms of time, we don't need long if we check in with ourselves. I just urge you to take time to check in on yourself quite regularly during the school day, so you don't have to bounce back from far. When I need someone, I know who that someone is, and I can get access to that someone. If I'm thirsty, then I need to go and get a drink. If I'm hungry, I need to go and get some satiation of that hunger. If you listen to your body is a good barometer of what you need and at the time that you need it. So you need to recognize it, but then importantly, to act upon it. I found this lovely card the other day, and I decided I'd just take the basic message from this. It gives us a definition, colleagues, of self-care. I think within the simplicity belies its power. The practice of taking an active role in protecting one's well-being and happiness. The word that's the operative word for me in this phrase is active. I think all too often we play a passive role, hoping that it's going to happen despite us recognizing it, managing it, dealing with it. But an active role gives some sense of it's our job as individuals to do something with this mental challenge. And if we do take control of it, and if we are active with managing it, then we can find ourselves in a really positive place. I find myself regularly in a positive place, not because I don't have the same woes and strains and stresses as others. The average of that, not the extremes. What I'm able to do is I'm checking in with myself regularly, and I'm actively, proactively taking control of my well-being. So I'm dealing with my own needs, not in a way that is getting in the way, or I'm not offering myself crazy rewards for not doing anything. It's not that. It's recognizing that I need to look after myself in order to do the job that I do. The alternative is this, folks, and it's deliberate. Your screen hasn't gone wrong. It's a deliberate change. And we don't give ourselves self-care. This is our perception. This is what we see. We get a very blurred image, a very fuzzy image of reality. The situations that we find ourselves in aren't sharp, aren't clear, and that lack of clarity means that we fumble around, we make poor decisions, we don't read people correctly, and therefore we make our jobs harder as a result. I can be very busy in my blurriness. I can demonstrate to others that I'm busy in my blurriness. Going out for a walk, stopping and having lunch gets me back to clarity. Therefore, there's a sharpness and a clarity about what I'm doing. And as a result of that sharpness and clarity, it allows me to proceed and be productive, efficient, effective, giving me time to manage my needs and my well-being, so I'm happier and more contented as a result. Who is number one? I'm hoping that I've convinced you that you are number one. And I hope I've given you food for thought to really consider that and to think that through in your own time. The other court at Wimbledon is Centre Court. And Centre Court is world famous. Everybody knows about it. And everybody thinks that it's an incredible space. The premium seat for the next 2 weeks or whenever Wimbledon is going to start in a week's time. A slightly greater capacity than court number one, opened slightly earlier than court number one, but got its roof later than court number one. It was the success of court number one that allowed it to get to its retractable roof. But now you started to get the idea of how these things work, folks. So what's he going to say about Centre Court, and what's that got to do with mental health and well-being? Well, let's take the word centre, and let's take the word centre and make that centre stage. What is at the centre of good mental health? What is at the centre of what you need to do? So we're not doing peripheral stuff. We're not doing stuff at the edges. We're doing the really, really important stuff. So we're not wasting time. We're making sure that our time is time well spent. What should be at the centre of what we do to look after ourselves? What is at the centre of self-care? Any ideas on the chat box, folks? What do we think is central to our well-being? What do you think is central to being resilient in the challenges that everyday life brings? Any ideas? Interesting. Yeah, emotional intelligence, being able to read other people is massively important, hugely underrated. But if we can read other people, and importantly, I would add, read ourselves, then I think that we're in a much, much stronger place than we have been. Okay, let's try these questions. Maybe a self-reflection rather than coming into the chat box. Let's have a look at these questions then, folks. Why don't you reflect on these? So what is at the centre of good mental health? Who is at the centre of good mental health? That second question links something to think around what we were saying before. We are at the centre of our own worlds, and that's not egotistical, that's just reality. That's fact. And therefore it's important we have to do what we need to do in order to be ourselves. Who feels that they've been able to find a good balance? And is knowing what is central one step closer to doing? Now, that final question goes back to something that I alluded to earlier, but I want to reinforce now. Knowing about it, being aware of our dropping resilience or our depleting or rising well-being is one step closer to where we need to be. However, it's not as close as we need to get. We're not going to be able to bounce back without going one step closer. We need to move it into actions rather than thoughts. Thinking about going to the gym to get fit is not the same as going to the gym and getting fitter. Thinking about your well-being is really important. Coming onto this call, listening to this webinar is important. It's an important first step to recognise the need. What that needs to be moved further forwards is to take actions, put something into your school day so that you don't have to wait for the weekend for it to happen. Someone in the chat box, be happy and confident of your own worth. I think self-worth is really important. And I think self-worth comes when we feel as if we're adding value. And our perception of adding value is much more accurately placed if we're in a good place, if we're feeling happy, or if we have enabled happiness. And happiness comes from being surrounded by like-minded folk. It's finding a love of learning. It's having the time to sit in nature or walk in nature and just be awe-inspired by the beauty of nature. Simple things that in a tech-driven world we sometimes don't check in on. We sometimes don't utilise those opportunities. But thank you, colleague. Being happy and having self-worth and that bringing confidence are very, very important aspects of resilience and well-being. So thank you. Thank you for that perception. I think that's really good. Before I move on that slide, think about how you're going to move this into actions for yourself. What could you start? Now this renewed awareness has come. How can you use that renewed awareness to get yourself one step further in order to find that happy place? Some ideas here, folks. Like yourself, adapt to change, dare to say no. Just go for it, take risks. We've stopped taking risks because we think that we can't take them anymore due to the negative things that might happen. But what about the positive things that might happen as a result of taking an informed decision? Talking about it, and we've talked about sharing that, haven't we? Trying something new is a good thing to do. Take the bad with the good and recognise that both are going to come our way all day, every day. Relax and let go, set goals, keep fit, ask for help, and count on friends. Many of these are relational, aren't they, folks? And that's because human beings are relational. We can't do it alone. We're hardwired to connect with others. But maybe this is an important final step, folks. What are you less good at on these elements? What are you less good at? Because maybe it's around recognizing what you're not good at, that you can then offer yourself some development points to what you're going to try and do better. Think about in a different way. Are you going to try to do something different? Are you going to be better at asking for help? Are you going to try and learn something new? Not about the pedagogy of education or Ofsted expectation, but something that interests you. So what would those three things be for you? Maybe when you get the slides after the presentation, you can have a think about that, because I'm aware of time coming. I was going to talk about how the scoring of tennis came about, but in very brief, because it's 15, 30, 40, isn't it, game? Why is that? Well, it's something to do with Agincourt, and you can read up on that. It's something to do with 45 being two words, 45, and that changes to 40, one word. It's something to do with the clock, but you'll have to look up that yourself, because I'm looking at the clock and the clock is saying, stop, David. So taking 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, gradually getting to the goal. One game, one game, one game, getting closer to the goal. One set, one set, one set. But moving that towards time, and you, 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. Just take iterative steps to get yourself forward. One day, one day, one day, iterative steps to get you forward. And eventually, one term, one term, one term, and you get to the end. And we've got to the end, folks. A very quick reflection on how Wimbledon can help to structure your ideas around how to look after yourself more than you possibly are before. Good luck in your explorations. It's been wonderful to have this time with you, folks, and I hope that it's offered you something to move you through into your weekend.
Well, thank you very much to David. Another wonderful session, lots for us to be thinking about, and thinking about our current practices being sustainable, and some real good pointers there about things for us to consider, especially sort of checking in, you know, with ourselves throughout the day. And I love the idea of hand holding and sort of needing to be empowered to look after ourselves, and then encourage.
Yeah, I like the hand holding idea. That was clever from colleagues.
Yeah, that was really good. So thank you very much. And David is back with us for his final session of this academic year in 3 weeks' time, everybody, on the 15th of July for his session. We're just popping up the poll now. If you're able to just complete that for us on your screen, that would be really helpful. Yes, David's back on the 15th of July, 3 weeks today, for his corner piece, puzzling out the importance of your resilience. So that'll be David's last session for this academic year. So thank you all so much for contributing. I hope you found that helpful. Please do complete the poll, and we very much look forward to see you in 3 weeks' time. And thank you, David. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good weekend when you get there.
Bye-bye, everyone.